There was a moment in this movie where I couldn't help but scoff a little bit at Spielberg for doing yet again the 1950s Roswell, traditionally looking Martian type thing, but it wasn't until the third act that the actual metaphor hit me, and I'm still not sure how I feel about it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the second channel. My name is Tom from Like Stories of Old, and today I want to talk about Disclosure Day, the big new summer blockbuster from Steven Spielberg. I didn't know too much about this one going in. I'd seen only one of the trailers, deliberately didn't look at the rest because I just wanted to go in and see what it was on my own, which was kind of interesting because Disclosure Day is a movie that immediately just throws you in the middle of it. We're introduced to Josh O'Connor's character, who's in the middle of fleeing from this secret non-governmental organization, and there's some exchange, some kind of exchange that takes place, and they're fleeing, and there's a whole lot to take in before the movie even establishes like, oh, what's going on, who are these people. But it does so, I think, in a mostly interesting way. I do kind of like it when movies do this. They just kind of throw you in the middle of it and then make you sort of play catch up as the story then progresses. Just right off the bat, being a Steven Spielberg movie, it was just nice to see a lot of classic filmmaking techniques being done very well again. There's a lot of beautiful compositions that work with like reflections, a lot of great blocking, a little too heavy maybe on the lens flares for my taste, but it wasn't too bad. Some amazing camera work, especially some of the longer shots, which weren't so long that they really draw attention to themselves as like a oneer, but just long enough to make you go like, wait, how did he just do that? Like, what just happened? Again, on a technical level, all that was just really well done. As for the story itself, I feel like this movie had a lot of things going for it, but all of it for me also came with like some kind of caveat, like this was great, but that. Or to put it like this, like every time I feel like it was about to elevate into something greater, it would just kind of fail to fully get me there. I'll have to get into spoilers to fully explain myself here, so from this point on, spoiler warning, I'm gonna talk about the story in its entirety. So just to kind of break it down, I do think there's a lot of elements here that lean heavily on nostalgia for something that is of the past. Besides the general story structure and story beats with the shadowy organization, the chasing, the secret, there's also, of course, the aliens themselves, which are very much kind of coded with more like 20th century alien folklore or Americana. We're going back to Roswell, back to the kind of Martian-looking aliens with the big brains and the big eyes. We're back to like some form of probing. And at first it just felt like it was Spielberg kind of going back to the fascinations of his own childhood and then just kind of like wallowing in that nostalgia. But I did feel like there was some deeper metaphor going on here when I kind of realized like, oh, the aliens are basically about the magic of cinema. I'm not saying it's like directly allegorical or even directly metaphorical, but that's at least like one symbolical layer that I got out of this. Because when you kind of break it down symbolically, you have these characters who at a young age were kind of imbued with these two keys to understanding or communicating with the aliens. The one being the universal language, and the second being empathy. And these, of course, are also kind of the basic foundations of cinema, right? It's something that you can discover at a young age, around the age that the characters were when they were sort of imbued with these quote-unquote powers by the alien force. But, let's say around the age of 10, when you're kind of old enough to be perceptive towards astonishment, but also still young enough to be like genuinely transformed by it. If you see that as kind of the age at which most people discover the magic of cinema, then of course the two basic qualities, I would argue, or at least what Spielberg maybe argues are like the cornerstones of cinema here, are that they are both vehicles for, one, a universal language, and two, empathy. That also goes back to that Roger Ebert quote of cinema being an empathy machine. And so what we have here is a kind of symbolical rendition of how cinema enters our lives and kind of grants us this universal language that allows us to connect with people around us, and then also with empathy as we are kind of immersed in the lives of others and come to understand them from their own point of view. Because that's what happens through cinema, right? You inhabit a different character for a short while, and you do that through like audiovisual language that in its very essence is universal. And so that's what I thought was interesting, because if you then extend that into the rest of the story, it basically becomes a tale of how we have kind of lost that magic as a society, or we've become too distracted from cinema, or at least what cinema represents. Because, of course, it's not just literally about cinema, I would say. Like, cinema in itself, I would argue, is already a metaphor for these deeper qualities that it brings forth and kind of cultivates. But anyways, within this context, we then get this world that has sort of forgotten the magic of cinema. And at the end, then, when we see the actual disclosure day, it kind of symbolically represents, or at least to me, some sort of renewed appreciation for the magic of cinema, basically. And again, the qualities for which that stands. So that's what I thought was kind of interesting here as a kind of symbolical undercurrent beneath this movie. But my main issue, I guess, is that I'm just not sure what the movie's intention is with that information, or with that kind of revelation at the end. Like, what exactly does it want to not necessarily say, but like, what is the emotion that is being evoked here at the end? Like, what is being redeemed, or what is being grieved? That's the bit where I wasn't quite sure about what the movie was going for. Because if we kind of circle back for a moment and come at the movie from a different perspective, it's also obviously very much about truth and collective truth in our society, and the erosion of it in the information age. And this does complicate a few things, because when it's so clearly like addressing the state of our current world, then it also becomes hard to not find, or not like experience, a sort of dissonance between what this movie is optimistically sort of yearning for and the actual reality of what that current state of the world actually looks like. Because this was my actual main concern with this movie as I was watching it, is that it was very much going to be this type of movie where you have this sort of hidden truth, and if the truth comes out, then everyone will suddenly see and everything will be transformed, which just doesn't feel like how this world functions anymore. Maybe I'm wrong, and I do hope that I'm wrong, but I just do not believe anymore that there's anything that can come out in terms of like hidden information or some kind of grand secret that is going to reunite our humanity around another like idea of objective truth. Like, I feel like that's something that a lot of older filmmakers especially are kind of struggling to reckon with, is that we may have passed a sort of Nietzschean God is dead moment when it comes to objective truth, or have some kind of collective wonder or astonishment that the whole world and everyone can sort of rally around, whether it's through like something good or something bad. I just feel like the information age has just kind of transformed the whole notion of objective truth so completely that that whole metaphor, that whole sort of cinematic metaphor, or that symbolism that I just described, doesn't really apply that much anymore, like not in the way that it used to. So I'm not sure if that dissonance is actually useful, in the sense that it's meant to invoke a kind of grief and lament for, remember how we used to be able to do this. We used to be able to see a truth come out and then rally around it, Like, if that's the intention here, to just kind of make us remember what we have lost, then I'm not sure if it was actually incisive enough to really make a difference. And if it isn't incisive enough to make its dissonance meaningful, then the dissonance becomes just that, it becomes a detachment from the very thing that it wants to say something about, which would render it less effective and less meaningful as a whole. Then it's just an old man yearning for like an objective truth that no longer exists in a society that no longer functions this way. Because that's also the thing with the way this movie portrays like its antagonists. it kind of argues, and quite beautifully so, that despite our world being very much divided right now and feeling like everyone's kind of radicalizing in different ideologies, that in our essence, we still very much are driven by the same human desires. At one point, someone in the movie said something about, we all want to believe and be believed. And I think that's true to some extent. And I think it is admirable to have villains here that are, and basically have everyone here kind of be united on that same basic sort of plane of emotional needs and psychological structuring. That even, the grand villain has someone that he loved, and that, through the power of empathy can be sort of dismantled in that way. But again, as a kind of message for the current world that we live in, I'm just not sure if it's incisive enough. I think the root of our issues and the root of the evil that we see today it just runs deeper and more complex than, oh, we just need to listen to each other again. We just need to be empathetic again. I think that's not the whole diagnosis of what's going on. Or at least if that's your solution, then I don't think you got the diagnosis fully correct. And again, I felt the same about the way this movie tackles its grand revelation and just the idea of a revelation in itself as evoking some kind of truth that we can all rally around. It's become painfully obvious that that's just not how the world works anymore. It felt like the movie wanted to address that very briefly, where in the newsroom towards the end, they were like, oh, maybe all this footage is AI, and then someone presses a button and she checks like, oh, no, it's not AI. And then as if that makes everything all right, as if verification is the issue and not the idea that the very concept of truth and objective truth has just been completely transformed by the information age, and it just doesn't have that same magic or power anymore that Spielberg here also kind of likens to that cinema, the power of cinema. And in fact, I think we've already reached a point where it's become clear that it's not even like dark hidden secrets anymore. It's just all out in the open. The whole idea of a government covering something up that can be exposed through like a grand revelation or disclosure is not even, it just doesn't feel like it applies anymore to a world where all of that stuff is just now happening out in the open. We're witnessing a genocide going on the other side of the world. The US is pretty much like openly corrupt. It's not like all of this is happening in the shadows anymore. There's nothing to bring to the light when it's all happening in stark daylight. And that's something that I feel like this movie and a lot of other modern movies, especially by older filmmakers, just kind of fail to grapple with. Just the sheer extent to which this world has changed, which cannot be remedied by some, oh, remember like how things used to be, or like let's go back to 2006 when we were still able to listen to each other and have civil discourse and whatnot. Because again, I feel like we might have passed like a sort of God is dead moment there, where truth just has fundamentally lost its power and believability in a way that we used to be able to kind of rely on it before. And so yeah, in that sense, I'm just not sure how I feel about this one. I've only seen it last night, so I'm still kind of working through these feelings myself, but I just can't help but feel it's like at once a movie that belongs like in 2006 or something, but that also wants to be relevant to 2026, even if it feels to kind of make a truly relevant statement. I think that's all I have on it now. This is just my first impression. I do look forward to kind of see what other people have said about this one and see what will be said about this one, because I'm not sure how it's going to land with like general audiences. I do feel like at a surface level, it was entertaining and engaging, very well made. I felt it had like a proper emotional build-up as well, and some effective like emotional moments where I did feel like, especially towards the end, like I did feel like I was drawn into the drama of it. But yeah, I also just couldn't help but feel like it had a little bit of like old dad energy that just isn't exactly what we need right now. And that even if it wants to do something sincere, and even if it came from like a place of love, I'm not sure if it was like, if it did so effectively.